Welcome to Beyond Words Presents. I'm your host, Whitney Diffenderfer, and this week I am here with Karen Herring, the author of Writing to Wake the Soul, Opening the Sacred Conversation Within. Karen is a literary minister, which is something that you've probably never heard of before, but I love the name of, and we're going to find out a little bit more about what that means as we go through the interview. And also, so you know, she's had me do an exercise to prepare for the interview, so I'm really excited to see where that goes. And I just wanted to, Karen, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Whitney. I am really happy to be here.
We're thrilled to have you. I want to let everybody out there know that if you want to submit a question, you can always use the Google Hangouts app, and you can also use the hashtag BWPresents. And be sure to subscribe to our channel on YouTube, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter. So, Karen, I just kind of want to dive into this because I have all my supplies. I have my half sheet of paper. I have a pair of scissors. I have a glue stick, and then I have a 8.5 by 11 white sheet of paper. So I've gathered all of these things, but first things first, let's just ask the question, and give people out there who are watching time to gather their own supplies, what exactly is a literary minister?
So it's actually a job that I made up when I came out of seminary, and it's a ministry that is about inviting people to use writing as a spiritual practice. So I go from place to place and I lead guided writing sessions. And it's an invitation to people to write about their own lives, but in a very particular way, in correspondence with other writers and with many times different religious stories and teachings, or with poetry. I use a lot of poetry. And it's a way for a person to write about their life, but always in relationship to the larger world, and sometimes in relationship to very old religious teachings from different wisdom sources.
I love that because, in like the artist's way and things like that, she always tells you to journal every day, to, write just for 45 minutes every day. And that slowly drives me crazy because I'm like, I'm not seeing the point in this. And even just in the exercise that you gave me to do before we got on the show together, I was like, I can see this going someplace very, very quickly and very easily. So I really appreciate that. And one of the things that you talk about a lot in your book is something called contemplative correspondence. And we always think of writing as sort of a one direction type thing. So what do you mean by contemplative correspondence?
Yeah, the reason that I call it contemplative correspondence is because, first of all, it is contemplative. It's a spiritual practice that is very much about listening. We think of writing sometimes as a activity that's about output, but this is writing that begins by just listening to your own heart and to your life and to what is moving through both of those on this particular day. And so it begins with listening, which I think is essential to every spiritual practice. And so it's contemplative in that way, and it's correspondence in a couple of ways. First of all, it's a correspondence between you and your heart, you and your soul, whatever language you use for that inner identity, where you know who you are and what your truth is. But it's also a correspondence between you and your future self, because the fact that you're putting this down on a page means you can look at it again in the future, and you will find very often meaning that was not apparent to you in the moment that you wrote it. So you're writing to yourself on a future day as well. And the third way that it's correspondence is that this is writing that is very much about the relationship between this and that. The relationship between me and you, the relationship between your words and the words of people who have come before you by centuries, and people who are very different from you in this particular moment on the earth today. And so it's really putting yourself and your life into relationship and correspondence with others and the world at large.
That's fascinating. Just in the last couple of weeks on our Beyond Words Present shows, I've realized that I resist writing things down, perhaps exactly for that reason, because then I would be putting myself in that general lexicon, that world that exists already, and I always like to think that I'm special. I've realized that about myself. So I think hopefully everybody has had enough time to gather their supplies, and I have my half sheet written on here. So do you want to share with everybody what I've done to prepare and what this exercise is?
Well, first I want to go back and talk about the theme that we're
Yes.
we're focused on, because that will bring that writing exercise into clearer focus.
Great.
So we kind of named this living and writing on the threshold, and the reason that I thought this would be a good topic for today, for one thing, I happen to be doing a lot of work, both in my writing sessions and in my own life, just really focusing on thresholds. And I find that it's a really rich place to be, and it's a place that all of us find ourselves on sooner or later. But also, it's the threshold is something that we're all on together right now. We are historically at a point of great change. And you can go through any of the major issues of the day and focus on how climate change or how, turmoil around the globe and racial relations and all these different things, we're on a threshold. And so the more that we learn how to pay attention to that threshold and to really awaken ourselves to all the dynamic possibilities that are there, the more that we personally and collectively will be able to cross these thresholds in a way that will take us to a better place than where we were before.
Can you give us your definition of a threshold?
Yeah, that's a good question. If you look it up in the dictionary, it'll tell you that it's that strip of wood underneath a door
Mm-hmm.
sill. And originally, that strip of wood was meant to keep the mud from washing into the house. I live in the upper Midwest, and so for us at this particular winter moment, it's also a very useful thing to keep the wind from blowing in under the door. And so it's that kind of marker between inside and outside. It's also, though, if you look at it in a sense of time, both physiologically and psychologically, a threshold is a word that is used to describe that tipping point, for lack of a better word, that marks when all of these events reach a certain point and something new happens on the other side. So the simplest example is the boiling point or freezing point of water. That's a threshold where the water actually changes its form. And in our personal lives, we cross thresholds all the time. Some of them are very daily and not as significant emotionally than others. You might think of a threshold in time of your day when you leave work and then arrive at home. And but on a bigger level, any time that you're crossing a threshold into a different identity. So maybe you're entering a relationship, maybe you're leaving a relationship, maybe you're becoming a parent, you have a new role, a new person in your life. Maybe you're losing a person, whether to death or to something unexpected as a change in relationship. Those are all thresholds in time. We also have thresholds that have to do with our achievements. So graduation is a threshold time. And of course, our death is the biggest threshold of all, following our birth. But each of these times is a time that's very dynamic. And so anthropologists will tell you that at a threshold moment when people gather at a wedding, for instance, the reason that weddings make for such great drama, not just between the bride and the groom, or the bride and the bride and the groom and the groom, but also between everybody who's there, is that in that celebration of threshold, everybody's identity is kind of up for grabs in that moment. And so there's this sense of shifting and real fertile possibility. And so being awake to those moments is a gift in awareness that allows us to choose how we will cross that threshold and what possibilities we will participate in bringing to being. So
That's fascinating. I just got married. Well, not just. I got married last May, and it's just what you're saying is making me think of all of the kind of strange things that happened at the wedding that had nothing to do with me or my husband. Just like everybody all around me was sort of shifting, and I found out about some other stuff that happened during the wedding, and I was like, what? So it's very, very interesting. And as you're also talking, I'm realizing I just start ticking off all the thresholds that I have in my life. And I did choose to write on one, but there's probably 15 others that I could write on right now that are reasonably big. I am in a time of big change right now for myself.
Yeah, yeah. And most of us are, you know?
Mm.
And so how we cross those thresholds, some of them are things that we've chosen. And so we want to move toward them. And other ones are ones that come to us just by virtue of aging or by changes in our life that are beyond our control. So if a major illness comes into my life and changes my abilities or even the length of my life,
Mm.
it comes to me as a threshold that I may not want to cross, but I actually don't have a choice. And so we can face these thresholds with a great deal of trepidation. And part of engaging writing as we cross our threshold is a way of honoring that if we pause on the threshold and spend a little bit of time looking back at what we're leaving behind, and then noticing all of these unknowns, but some things we might speculate about that we're going toward. That's a really fruitful activity. And so, like, one of the writing prompts that I lead people through is I say, just pause for a moment and make a list of things you're leaving behind, and just start with a prompt like, what I'm leaving now, and just write from there, whether it's in list form or just sentence after sentence.
Mm.
And then turn your attention forward and say, what I'm moving toward, and keep going on that. And really what this is doing, it's really age old. Like, you know, the Roman god Janus
Mm-hmm.
was this one of the oldest Roman gods, and his face was carved with two faces back to back over the gates of every city and over the doorways of many homes. And one of the faces would be pointing inward and the other outward. And it's this way of honoring that Janus is the god of beginnings, but also of endings. And so whenever we pause, you know, we live at such a breakneck speed that sometimes we tumble into change without ever pausing to notice what we're leaving behind and what we're moving toward. And then, you know, weeks, months later, we wake up in tremendous grief. And we don't even know why, because we haven't acknowledged that we left something behind.
Hmm. Absolutely, and I am as guilty of it as anybody. I don't know the last time that I stopped to think about me and what's going on with me. Actually, this hour each week that I get to spend with you or others of our authors is pretty much the one time where I get to sit and think about, you know, what's really going on with me. And I don't take more time than that. And I know that a lot of people are just like me.
It's very common. And, you know, in fact, that rapid speed that we're living at is accompanied by a rapid rate of change.
Mm.
So if you look at, I love this quote from Margaret Mead. And, you know, I mean, she died in 1978. So consider how old this quote is. It's before the internet, before all of these things that went on rapid change. And Margaret Mead said, you know, if you think about it, everybody over the age of 25 is essentially an immigrant, because only the very young are living in a world that they're native to.
Huh.
The rest of us are just adapting and learning new languages and trying as hard as we can to catch up, but we are immigrants because the world changes so fast.
That
And
is
so,
fascinating.
isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. It's so true, especially with all the technology that we have nowadays. And there's,
Yeah.
you know, Facebook and, well, even just email. Like my grandmother, when dealing with email, you just don't email her, just call her. But we have a viewer question real quick before we jump into the exercise. And the question is, so would you say that a threshold is an in-between place where we are not who we were, but we aren't our newness yet? And how do you not freak out at such a place?
That's a really good description of a threshold because it is this place of between. And sometimes when I talk about thresholds, I describe what happens to a caterpillar when it becomes a butterfly. If you look at the process, and that's such a common natural example of something going through tremendous transformation. But the part that isn't always talked about when it's used as a metaphor is that there is a stage in the chrysalis when the caterpillar loses all form and it turns to goo. And the caterpillar resides there in this state of goo before it becomes a butterfly. And for many of us, that is the frightening thing that we feel as the way that we are when we're crossing between one identity and another. We don't feel the structure of what's familiar, and we don't yet have the structure of what is yet to come. And so that can be really frightening. And that's one of the gifts of paying attention, because when you do this writing across the threshold, you begin to see the threads that are your commonality between then and what is yet to come. And those threads will carry you like a lifeline across tremendous change. And you can also take the time to identify who are your guides, who will walk with you across this threshold, or who is going to be waiting for you on the other side. And so often we focus behind us at the people we're leaving behind. But by really being attentive on the threshold, you start to pay attention to those people. You might not even have met most of them yet, but just naming that there are people there waiting for you, whether they're people who will have this in common with you, or whether they're people you have known who have wisdom to offer you, there are always people waiting on the other side who will guide you and welcome you.
That's such a beautiful and comforting thought. I just realized that my husband is very good at seeing those threads and seeing that those people waiting for you on the other side, and I am more of a, but this is what I'm leaving. What do you expect of me? I go that direction. Thank you for that answer. I think that's beautifully said, and I love the question as well. And I guess we just all have to get a little comfortable with our goo phase.
Right.
So just to go into well, first, before we go into the exercise, I want to mention to everybody, this is the beautiful book that Karen has written called Writing to Wake the Soul, Opening the Sacred Conversation Within. Absolutely lovely, like beautifully written, and it contains lots and lots of prompts on how you can interact with certain words in your life and things like that. It's wonderful, and you can get that for half price. It's a great Beyond Words Presents discount, so it's 50% off, and so it's only $12 for this beautiful hardcover book, and you can get that at www.beyondword.com/herring, HERING. Be sure to go and grab it, and you can start your writing prompts now. But I'm going to start my writing prompt right now with you, Karen. So I have what I wrote, and I have all of my materials. So what do I do?
So I just want to ask if you want to do one other writing prompt first, which would just be a red reflection on some of those more intimidating thresholds that we don't want to cross. And if you don't want to do that first, we can jump into the other one.
Either way, I'd love to do another writing prompt. I don't have any more paper here with me besides these two sheets, but I'd love it. I love writing.
Well,
I actually do love writing.
In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the setup. And so anybody who's watching this now or at any other time will be able to do this now or then. And I'll end this. I'm just going to read you a scene. And this is how I often lead my guided writing sessions. So you can just kind of follow this scene. And at the end, there will be a writing prompt, which will be half of a sentence. And you can write the half of a sentence down now and complete it later.
Okay.
But one of the things that I'll explain is that part of the way this method works is it's really about paying attention to the edges of our experience. So when I give you a half-written sentence and then it trails off in ellipses, what I'm doing is offering you this is like a threshold of its own. And it's an invitation for you to go across that threshold and continue the writing in your own words wherever it leads you. And so this is just an example of how that works. And before I do it, I will also say one of the other critical things, and it's funny that I chose that word, in this process is to send your inner critic out the door. So whenever you sit down to do writing as a spiritual practice, if you have a strong inner critic, and a lot of us do when we're facing an open page or an empty screen on the computer, that critic might be really useful when you do your writing for work or for publication or any other kind of writing. But when you're doing spiritual writing, there is nothing that will send your soul running as fast as a good, strong inner critic. And so you want to find some way to dismiss that critic. Send it out the door, tell it, thank you for your advice on spelling and grammar and punctuation and style, but not now. So let yourself hear the words, put them down on the page as a recorder, and don't worry about how they're spelled or what they look like or sound like. Just put them down. You can always tinker with them later. But the soul will choose its own grammar, and you want to respect that. Okay?
Okay, got it.
So this is a reflection that I wrote after an experience with my sister, and it's called Time to Think a Thought, about those thresholds that are frightening. You'll have time to think a thought, my sister said to me with the voice of experience, having been there before. This was years ago. We stood, two young adults, on the edge of a rocky precipice in southwestern Colorado, both of us with a fear of heights. Below us, far, far below us, a lake of aqua blue water reflected sky and clouds with a dizzying turn of perspective. It was a hot, sunny day. The water below would have been inviting had it been just a little bit closer. I was trying to dismiss the distance, but my sister's words kept repeating in my head. You'll have time to think a thought, a whole thought, between the moment you jump and the instant your body slips into the water below. Anchored to the stony ledge by my ironclad fear, I could not imagine any thought strong enough to convince me to let go, to leave the known world of feet planted on solid ground and leap into thin air. Then I heard my brother-in-law running up behind me. His bare feet slapped against the rock with a rapid stride, never slowing for a second as he approached the rock's edge and catapulted his body forward in a single sailing arch. It was beautiful. His arms and legs swung joyfully through the air, tasting the instant's freedom until, with a distant splash, he slipped out of sight beneath a small circumference of bubbles and waves, appearing soon after with a broad, exuberant smile. In time, long after my sister and everyone else had jumped, I mustered a kind of reluctant resolve, short of courage, but thankfully strong enough to cast me from that rocky cliff toward the water below. There was nothing speedy or graceful or carefree about my launch, but oh, what a full-bodied thought I had when my feet left that cliff. My skin was kissed by the wind, my hair brushed back from my face, my hands and feet giddy with weightlessness, and the thought sailing through me was a sweet, complete song that for an instant swept my mind clear of all its fear. And as the cool water rose up to meet me, I wondered, why had I not done this sooner? So as you consider that story, what I ask you to do, if you want to write from it, now or later, but ask yourself, what invitations to leap in your life are you experiencing now? Or maybe they're invitations to step cautiously or reluctantly. Where are you being invited to move forward despite your fears, and to let the world bless you with its wind and its waters, to step away from what you've known before and think a new, full thought as you do? And as you begin writing about that, you might use these words to begin. Here on the edge, I, here on the edge, I, and keep writing from there, following wherever it leads, and writing for as long as you'd like to explore that particular threshold.
Awesome. I love that story. It's beautiful. Okay, I've jotted down that prompt, and I'm gonna do that. I'm definitely gonna do that later, because this one you only let me write for half a page, and I am a rambler, so that was very limiting for me. I'm like, I just want to keep writing. You're like, no, you stop. Stop at your half page. I'm like, okay. Thank you very much. And everybody out there, and feel free, like, take this on. Do Karen's prompt. Let us know what you find. Go onto our Facebook page and share with us what you're getting out of it, or you can post on Google Plus and let us know. And if you have any other questions after you've done the prompt, like after the show is over, if you don't have time to submit a question now, always feel free to submit questions on Facebook or through Twitter or even through our Google Plus account, and we can get them to Karen. We can get those answered for you. So feel free to continue the interaction once the actual hour is complete. So, Karen, I'm just so curious about this other prompt that you had me do. I chose the threshold that I'm looking at right now is actually, it's kind of one that I feel like I'm in the middle of right now. In an interview a few weeks ago with Kyle Cease, I really got that I've just been hiding and have not really taken on my own personal health. And so I'm in the midst of doing kind of a cleanse for myself, and I see it as a huge tipping point for me. It's like, this is the one where I've decided, it's like, okay, so this is my old life, my old way of being around food, and then I want to create a new person, a new Whitney when it comes to food. So that was the threshold that I had selected to write on today.
That sounds great, and I really appreciate you being willing to do this with me. So, so let me just back up and explain to everybody else what I asked you to do.
Yes, please.
And the reason I wanted to start with the last one was just to honor the fact that some of our thresholds can be really frightening. Whether it's something we're really afraid of or just plain old reluctant, you know, and changing our habits it has so much resistance built into it because we have to consciously almost build the threshold and then cross it.
Yeah.
And so there's extra work in crossing a threshold that has to do with changing a habit. So that's a great one to use. And so this is a writing prompt that I've asked Whitney to do that has to do with crossing a threshold to which you have some resistance. And so I asked her to take a half sheet of paper, so like a 5.5 by 8.5 sheet of paper vertically, and to write on that from a writing prompt, what makes it hard to move on. So imagine yourself on a threshold that you're having trouble crossing for whatever reason. Think about what makes that hard and begin writing with that prompt. What makes it hard to move on, and then just follow that wherever it leads you, but fill up your page from the top to the bottom. And like Whitney said, don't turn it over and write some more, just this one page. And it doesn't matter if you're even ending at the end of a sentence. So do you want to tell us any more about your experience with that part?
I loved writing about it because there's something, it just feels like there was a lot of thoughts in my head because I'm super, super resistant to this because I'll just say it straight up. It's like, I love cheese, I love sweets, I love all of the things that are not good for me. And so when I look at living a healthy life, it's like, I just wish that I was somebody who didn't like all of those things. I wish that could just go away. And at the same time, it's kind of become part of who I am. So I just have a lot of resistance to that. And I realized that I hadn't ever just sat down or even talked to somebody and voiced that and said, these are the things that I'm holding on to that are making it hard to move on, just as you say. And so getting even just a few of them down on paper was like, oh, so that's it. Okay. now I can look at it and it's not just running around inside my head, as we always talk about when writing something. It's great to get it out of your head.
Exactly. It suggests to you that there may be some choices because you get to step back from it.
Yes.
But what we're going to do here, and this is a writing practice that I use a lot with groups in many different contexts. And really what it's based on is that Buddhist teaching that tells us that we so often get stuck to the story we tell ourselves about the way the world is and the way we are. And that's not just Buddhism. It's, good teaching from most of the world religions and also a whole lot of psychology.
Yes.
But the Buddhist teachings beautifully put it when they say, don't get stuck to your story. The story is meant to open and change, so don't get stuck to it. And just about every world religion that I know of is also based on this idea of opening the story of what is possible and making room for something new to move through it. If you look at the wisdom teachings, you'll see all kinds of examples of this. But it's also the goal of religion, is to make room for something new. And so what I'm going to ask you to do, Whitney, I asked you to have a scissors on hand, right? You have a scissors?
Right here.
Okay. So I want you to take your scissors and starting from the bottom, I want you to make a curvy cut going around the words to cut a line from the bottom to the top. You see what I'm doing here? I'm cutting around the words. I don't cut the words in half.
Oh, okay.
But I'm going to go
like a little river
all the way
through
up.
them.
Yep, like a river, right up the top.
I also love any sort of crafting, so this is just totally up my alley.
Well, I have to tell you, people are very different about that. There are some groups that I do writing sessions with, and if I put the scissors and glue out on the table before they come in, some people will say, "Oh no!" and they almost want to run away.
Oh no!
And other people like you love it.
Yep. I just think it's so much fun, and it just taps into a different side of you as a person.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I have two curvy pieces.
So you have 2 pieces?
Yes.
All right. Excellent. So now what I want you to do is take that blank sheet of paper horizontally.
Okay.
And I want you to glue the 2 pieces down on either side of it. So that, let's see, yeah, does that show up?
Yep.
So that you have a big white space in between.
Okay.
And glue it down.
Here's hoping this glue stick isn't too old.
Part of what this is doing now, I don't know if you felt this when you cut it, Whitney, but a lot of people who do this tell me that just making that cut right down the middle of the story is a very, it's an embodied experience of how their story has the possibility of opening up to something new.
I'm just feeling a lot of joy right now, and I don't know if that's because I'm getting to do a craft, or if it's just because it now also just occurs to me as a story. It's like it is this thing that I put down on paper, and I just cut it in half. I mean, most of the stories that you keep in your head, they're so real, they're so all-consuming that you can't see them for anything but the truth. And here I've taken something that has been controlling me for most of my life, and I just wrote it down on a piece of paper, and I cut it in half with a really awesome squiggly line, and it's kind of fantastic. Okay.
Okay.
All good.
So, you want to hold it up so everybody can see?
Yep, there we go.
Great. All right. So now what I want you to do is to look at the squiggly edge of your writing and just kind of scan it with a pen in hand, and wherever you see a word that catches your attention, underline it or circle it for whatever reason. You don't have to know why. Just look along. So if you can see on here, if I look right along this edge, and any words that catch my attention, I'll circle and underline. And if along the way I see one over here that I like, I'll circle that too. Okay?
Okay.
So just scan it for any words that look interesting for whatever reason. And when you do this at home, I'm just going to keep talking while Whitney's working. Sometimes it helps to have a different colored pencil so you can play with underlining the words. You can always come back to this later and use those words in a different way. But what you're doing right now is just pulling out any words that pique your curiosity in what you're reading without looking at them in the context that you have written them.
Okay. Okay.
All right. So now that you've underlined those words, I'm going to give you a writing prompt and invite you to write down the middle of your page a whole new piece of writing. And the way that this works, and we won't fill up the whole space because that probably wouldn't be very interesting to everybody else watching. But Whitney, if you would just think about writing a few sentences, and the goal is to use as many of the words that you circled or underlined as possible or as you want to. You don't have to use them all, but try to use a few of those words in writing a new story that will begin with the words, "What if?" And follow that wherever you want, considering crossing this threshold, and you can reuse the words you've underlined in any form or context. They don't have to carry the same meaning as you do this writing. So you begin with the words, "What if?" and write down the middle of that page with a new piece of writing. While Whitney's doing that, I'm going to hold up one that I did earlier, and you can see I used green paper for the background. And so I wrote right down the middle, picking up words that I had underlined on either side. It doesn't really matter how much writing you put in the middle. It's just giving yourself a chance to write a new story, reusing the words from the sides and opening up a different possibility in your imagination that's very much based on what you remember and what you know about where you are and where you've been and who you are and who you might become. While Whitney is writing about this, I will just mention that I've used this in a lot of different contexts and settings. So if there's anything in your life, it doesn't have to be a threshold, but anything that you are stuck on. Maybe last weekend I was leading a retreat with a group of people who were writing about their longings and what it would take to follow their heart's longing. And for a lot of people, one of the barriers was finding enough time or figuring out how to balance their longings against all of their responsibilities. So we ended the retreat by having them write about all of those things, those restrictions in time and responsibilities that make it difficult to follow your longings. And then I had them cut it in half and do this exercise and write about, bringing some of those words into the middle and writing about a different possibility for following their longing, given what they know about the very real limitations of their own lives. Because all of our lives are made of limitations. It's how we rearrange them to make new possibilities emerge. What do you think, Whitney?
Great. I just finished. I wrote all down the middle.
Whoa!
I write really quickly, and I have lots and lots of very quick thoughts. I just looked at the words, and it was just like the prompt, what if? I actually started the first few sentences with what if, because it's like I underlined words like hard, move, love, food, worry, wish, things like that, that just kind of grabbed my attention when I was looking down the two sides. And it's just like, okay, so it's like, what if it wasn't hard to move, like to exercise and stuff? What if it was just part of life? What if I fell really deeply in love with myself completely? And just keeping going about all of the different things that were popping up to me. And that was a lot of fun. And at the very bottom, I got, because one of the things that I was resisting leaving is that my husband and I really bond over cooking. I'm his sous chef and he's the chef, and we play together that way, and it's really fun. And I just said, what if we could experiment with what would make our life tasty, not just the food in our life, and just really exploring, there's that phrase, the spice of life. That popped up for me.
That's a great ending in your writing. Wow.
It was cool. It was very cool. Thank you very much.
So that's also a good demonstration, though, about reusing the words and
Mm.
how when you do that with the opening prompt, like what if, it really engages your imagination in taking what is given in your life and understanding that for a lot of us, there are many givens that we can't change. You know, if I'm 5'4", if it doesn't matter how much I want to be 5'10", I can't unless I wear stilts, right? So there are many givens like that in each of our lives, and thresholds often come with a set of limitations that we don't want. So when you're crossing them, if you take those givens and just invite your imagination to look at how you might arrange those givens and what's the story that you can tell yourself about them in your life, you'll be awakening your ability to cross that threshold in ways that will be more desirable.
Mm. Well, and it reminds me of what you said before. It's in that goo phase. It is giving me. It's like drawing those lines between, like giving me that kind of thin yet still there structure to get from one place to the next.
Very much so, yeah, yeah.
Getting me through the goo phase. I'm just gonna keep thinking about that. And I guess one of the things that I know that I've discovered a lot when I just keep looking at this because it's fascinating me, so I apologize for continuing to look down. But one of the things that really bothers me sometimes, and I would love your perspective on this, is that it feels like I don't ever make it to the quote-unquote other side of the threshold. It feels like sometimes I get stuck either on the threshold or I roll back to the other side. And I'm just curious, do you find people do that a lot, and how would you help them move forward or just figure out what's going on?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I would say that any of these kinds of practices make it more likely that you'll be able to cross the threshold. But one of the, like, for instance, one of the other prompts that I will do with people is also really, it's visual. So we get out markers and crayons and colors, and I have people draw a map of their threshold and name the different terrains that they're crossing. Like, are you going through the swamp of indecision? Or do you find yourself at that sheer rock face of a cliff that you have to climb? Or are you in a desert and things are totally parched? And just by naming these different terrains in any threshold in our lives, it awakens our awareness to how we feel about it. And once you do that in a map, then I have people write about things like, okay, if that's the terrain you're crossing, what are the tools you're going to need? And who are the guides you're going to need to cross it? So if if you find yourself going through, the northern tundra, you're going to need snowshoes and very warm clothes. And when you think about these things metaphorically, it allows you to access a different part of your knowledge. That's really what this writing practice is about. It's awakening our metaphorical abilities to understand our lives that sometimes go beyond our analytical brain.
Mm.
And it gives us access to deeper knowledge and more intuitive knowledge. And so once you write about that, sometimes you'll come up with a really surprising awareness and just be able to say, oh, I didn't realize that, if I had a companion to go to the gym with me every day, this would not be a lonely endeavor. So if I'm an extrovert and I got to go to the gym every day, if I have somebody on that equipment next to me who's a friend and able to talk me through it, it's a different activity. That's a really lighthearted one, but in some of the groups that I do, we talk about the way in which finding your travel companions, especially when you're crossing thresholds. They don't have to be people crossing the same threshold, but just somebody who can be there with you and accompany you in one way or more will be a great assistance. So, those are some of the ways that I see this process helping, because it connects people to that deeper knowledge that comes out in metaphorical thinking. And it also connects people to one another.
Well, I just in my own personal experience, and I know I just want everybody out there to know that this exercise took me probably all of 5 minutes, because sitting down and writing the first prompt took me a minute because I just had so much to say. It just came out so quickly, and then just going through the quick exercise that you and I just went through, it's so fast, and I feel so much lighter. I do. I feel like I'm the master of this thing that I feel like has been holding on to me, and it's really liberating. It's really, really nice. And I think one of the things that you're saying is happening to me right now. It's that ability to get around all of the thoughts and the analytical mind that is constantly, my analytical mind is like a monkey brain. It's just constantly going. And so I wrote down the idea about drawing a map of my threshold, and that also just intrigues me. It brings out a creative side in me that I know lots of us out there, it's like we don't necessarily have a lot of time to be creative and to look at our problems in a creative way. So being able to do something as simple as drawing a map, I mean, you could do that on a napkin at the bar or something like that. So I love it. Thank you.
Good. And when you say it makes you feel lighter, that is, interestingly enough, probably the single most common phrase I hear from people when they do this. And I am amazed by how many different ways people use this exercise and still come up with that phrase. So there's something about it that lifts the weight of, maybe it's the weight of thinking that things have to be the way they are. And just offering us that breathing space of really believing it doesn't have to be this way. It could be something else. And here's an opening where I can actually imagine that happening.
And it's the weight, for me, it's the weight of my story. I've been holding on to that so very tightly and just thinking that, okay, I'm going to have to drag this whole like massive story with me. Somehow I'm going to have to get it up and over this threshold in hopes that I can change it, transform it, make it disappear, whatever that is. So being able to leave that giant bag of stuff on that side of the threshold and just walk over it, just me, is huge.
Right.
I love it.
And I also just want to say that part of when I work with groups on this method, one of the things that happens is I spend a lot of time setting things up using poetry. We use physical objects and imagery, and I sometimes describe what I do as I'm like a sous chef. So we'll go back to your culinary story here, but this is metaphorically speaking. I think of myself as a sous chef, lining up all these ingredients that have been chopped and prepped and cleaned, and they're all laid out for people to come and just fold those into their writing. And so it takes away the stress of trying to find the right thing. It's all laid out there, and you just grab, you don't think about what you're grabbing. When I tell people, when I use physical objects, and you can do this in your own house, just walk through the house, and when something catches your attention or curiosity, pick it up and write about it in relation to whatever question you're holding. And what this does is it activates the part of our brain that's our associative brain. It's the same part that is at work in our dreams. And you know the way your dreams will pull in different things and sort of rearrange them in what can seem like nonsensical ways, and then you wake up and you think, wow, I feel like I just solved a problem. I have no idea how. But that was a really satisfying dream, you know?
Yes.
And that's what this is doing in this writing practice, is it teaches you to look at the whole world that way, and to look at it for things that can be metaphorical invitations to understand your life in a new and in a really exciting way that's full of possibilities.
Well, and we do have another viewer question, and I'm curious about this as well, is there any value in sharing these writings with others we trust?
That's a really good question, and one that I always encourage people to do this. And at the beginning of every writing session, one of the things I say to people is that writing can take you to a place of great joy or a place of great challenge. And sometimes our sorrows and our difficult emotions or passages in life will come out on the page. And even though your writing is very personal and it's just between you and the page, if you find your writing taking you there, just the baseline advice I have is to not carry that story alone. Take that piece of writing or the content and share it with somebody you trust and love, or share it with a professional that you trust who can, help you understand what's beneath it, or help you, really find a way to cross that material. But also, when you talk about what you're writing, even if you're not in a difficult place with what you're writing, it's really rich to share this with other people. It can open up whole new conversations with friends, with family, with, if you do this in groups in any place, share what you've written with the caveat that it's, you've released your inner critic, so you have to release your critique of one another as well. And really regard these words as if they were just spoken. They've just fallen to the page with all the vulnerability of a newborn child just arrived in the world. So you receive these words from somebody else with every bit the generosity you would have if they laid a newborn in your arms, and you would look at that child and you wouldn't critique it for having a big nose or a small chin or anything else. You would look at it and you would say, oh, how beautiful. Thank you for letting me share this with you. So that's the spirit of sharing your writing with one another too.
I love that. And it's a very, I've always thought of this about writing. It's a very personal experience, but also it can be a very public experience at the same time. And it's one of those few things that when you write it down, it just becomes solid, and it becomes this one thing that you can share, you can keep to yourself, whatever that is. And I love that kind of transitory aspect of it. I love writing, and I've always wanted to. Oh my goodness, I'm going to say this out loud. I've always wanted to be a writer, and I've always been afraid of it too because of that inner critic. And it's becoming very obvious to me how much my inner critic is stopping me, because just setting it down in order to write this was hard.
Yeah, well, congratulations on doing it, because you wrote very quickly, so you must have disbanded your inner critic pretty well.
Do you have pointers or advice for people on how they can maybe a little exercise or something that you can do to set that inner critic aside if it's kind of challenging? Because I know a lot of people going into an exercise like this, they would maybe get stopped by that inner critic, even if they said, okay, yes, thank you, go away.
Right. Well, one of the things I encourage people to do is to really set their writing time for this kind of practice aside from their normal day-to-day writing time. So clear a space that feels special to you. For some people, you might actually make a little altar. I tend to write at the eastern window in my house where I can watch the sunrise, and I have my singing bowl there and a candle, and I light the candle at the beginning, and I ring the singing bowl, and these are both, they've become for me um, ways that remind my inner critic that, okay, this is time, you got to go out the door, go on, get out. I silence the phone, and all of that becomes a message to myself that it's meditation time. It's time for deep listening that I honor by giving it a beginning and an ending. And I use the singing bowl because the way that the singing bowl works is, you get this very pure sound that trails off into nothing. I don't know if it'll work online. I'll try it. Now I can still hear it ringing, but I'm guessing you can't.
I can hear a
And
little bit. That's awesome.
okay. And so what I do, I start with that and I listen to it until it is entirely gone. And what that reminds me is that when I write, the words are never the point. The words are not the greatest outcome. They're not the goal of a spiritual practice of writing. The words on the page are really just arrows that are pointing towards something deeper, something beyond all words that is off the page. It's often off the limits of our spoken awareness. And so what we're doing when we do this kind of writing, there's this Buddhist saying about, the Buddha tells you that when someone points at the moon, you don't look at the finger, you turn and you look at the moon. Well, that's what the words in a spiritual practice of writing are. They are just fingers pointing at the moon, and you want to look away from the words toward the larger awareness and larger knowledge and deeper love that they're pointing to. And so the bowl reminds me of that at the beginning, and it reminds me to pay attention to where my words trail off into silence, into something so much bigger than anything I could ever write and anything I could ever be as an individual person. That it's all just about connecting me to that larger essence that is what we're all a part of.
Well, Karen, thank you so much for being here with us today. We are coming up on the end of the hour, and I just want to make sure that everybody knows who's watching out there that they can get a copy of your book, Writing to Wake the Soul, which is exactly what I feel like we've done this hour. Thank you so much. They can get a copy of your book at half off, so it's only $12 at www.beyondword.com/herring, HERING. And I also just want to say again that if you have questions or if you've gone through your exercise and there's something that comes up for you, please share it on our Facebook page or give us a shout out on Twitter or let us know on Google+. We would love to hear your feedback. This is just such a great exercise, and I'll just keep saying it over and over again. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Whitney. It's great to be here with you.
But I want to let everybody know next week we are having David Seidman. He's the author of the upcoming book, What If I'm an Atheist? It's a book that was actually written for teens who are dealing with what does it mean and what is it to be an atheist. And it's very, very interesting because he's a middle-aged Jewish man, and he saw a need for teens, and so he's going to be discussing what it was like for him to explore that world, being who he is. So we will see you all next week, same time, same place. Have a wonderful week, and thank you again, Karen.
Thanks.